This week on the Timelapse Show, we're spending the entire show here in a remote location to show you all the ins and outs, all the buttons, all the functionality that you can use when shooting time-lapse with a GoPro camera. Welcome, fellow time-lapsers, to the Time-Lapse Show. My name is Steve Barth. I am your host. This is show number 8 for the week beginning August 5th, 2018. As you can see, we're not in the studio this week. I decided to come outside for a number of reasons. First of all, it's a really hot day, which might make you think, why in the world did you come outside? And trust me, I've been questioning that myself. Turns out, because it's such a hot day down in the Willamette Valley, I decided to get out of town and try to find someplace cool. So did everybody else in town. So the falls right now are really crowded. There's a lot of people there, a lot of which are using the waterfalls as kind of their personal shower, which does not lend for beautiful scenic time lapse. So I'm stalling for a few minutes before I get my camera set up to get that shot. And during this stall, I will walk you through everything you need to know about using GoPros. Do bear with a little bit in this week's show. For those of you watching the video version of the show, you'll notice I've got, it's like the game show host microphone with me. With the large waterfall right over there, it really wreaks havoc on trying to record audio with little tiny lapel mics that are on my shirt. So we're going to go with this one to make sure that whether you're watching the video version or you're listening to the audio version, you still have some high quality audio, even with all the noise right over there and people and everything else. Now, I just want to give you a quick outline as far as where I'm going with this. I'm starting, will probably be about a month-long adventure through time-lapsing with different types of cameras. Now, we're starting this week, like I said, with the ins and outs, a deep dive into the GoPro series of cameras. GoPro tends to make a really popular sports action camera, which is really suited for time-lapse photography. GoPro also has really inexpensive cameras, so if you really want a great place to start with your time-lapse photography, this is an excellent place to start. That's why I'm going to start with this particular camera. Now, in future episodes, I'm going to go into some additional cameras, and the first way that I figured I could really kind of sparse this out, because there's so many different types of cameras with so many different features, is the next camera episode I'm going to do will be about DSLR cameras that don't have an intervalometer built into them. The episode after that will be DSLR cameras that do have a built-in intervalometer, and I'll show you the difference between those two types of cameras and how best to set those up. But again, future episodes. The fourth episode in this particular series, coming along towards the end of the month, will be all about time-lapse with iPhones. So that kind of covers all the bases. Your GoPros, different styles of DSLR cameras that you may own or be thinking of getting, and finally the iPhone. So you know what your options are and how to use all of those different types of cameras as the month of August progresses. So with that kind of outline, let's go into some specifics about the GoPro. So let's start through the ins and outs of using a GoPro when shooting time-lapse photography. Now, first of all, we've got to get the camera set up. And there's a few things you've got to remember. First of all, you have to connect the camera to a tripod. You have to use a tripod when doing time-lapse photography because you're holding the camera still over a long period of time. And without that tripod, it's going to be impossible to hold that camera still. So you have to have the connector. And with a GoPro, it's this little small connector that connects it to your camera. These are small, these are tiny, these are inexpensive, but because they are so small and tiny, they are really easy to forget when you're trying to pack the bigger things like cameras and recorders and tripods. So I would highly recommend getting several of them and stashing them in every camera bag that you have. Like I said, small, inexpensive, really easy to forget. So have multiples of them on you, and then you can use that to connect the camera to the tripod. The next thing that you're going to need is some sort of an external power source. Now, this really only applies if you're planning on shooting extra long time lapses. Typically speaking, I've discovered that I can get between 2 and 3 hours out of a freshly charged GoPro battery. So if that's the length of time lapse that you're planning on doing, then great. You've got yourself covered just within the battery. But if you're going to be going longer, you need to have some sort of a battery pack. And what works great is these little battery packs that are now really popular that they sell for charging phones. As long as you can plug some sort of a USB connection into it and it holds that charge, it should work great. So all those mobile chargers that you have should work great for powering your GoPro camera. Now here is the trick. You'll notice that when we're hooking up the camera itself does not connect to the tripod. It's the little plastic case that goes around the camera that allows that connector to be put there. In order for the cable to be plugged into the camera, this cable here that goes from the camera to the battery pack, there's a little door onto the side, and that door has to be open. Well, one of the problems people run into is that door can't be open when the black casing is on the camera. So what you have to do is simply remove that little door. What I recommend there is you open up the little door, and then you just give it a little tug, put it at about a 45-degree angle to the camera. You don't want to pull straight down or straight out. That could break the door. But put it at about a 45-degree angle and then give it a little tug, and that door will pop right off. With that door off, you can now plug your cable in. Now, here's something else to keep in mind. When that door is off the camera will no longer be water or weatherproof. So any rain is going to be able to get into that side port and potentially mess up the camera. So just be very conscious of that. Remember, with that doors off, that camera is exposed. And so just use caution when you have that door off. Now, at some point in time, because like I said, that's what weather seals the cameras, that little port right there, you're going to want to put that door back on. And lots of people, myself included, have struggled greatly with how to do this. So there is a trick to it. If you don't do the trick, you will probably damage the door trying to put it back on. So here's what you need to do. When you're releasing that door, there's a little button that you're going to push down. Once the door is off, you're going to want to push that same button. It's going to pop a little mechanism behind the door out. And once that mechanism is exposed, then you can plug it easily right back into the camera. So make sure you push the button first. When the door is off, release the mechanism, put it back on, and then you should be set to go. So all that said, now you should have your camera connected to a power source on the tripod, ready to shoot a nice long extended time lapse. And from there, we need to go into the specific modes and the specific settings that you're going to encounter when you turn on that GoPro camera, so you know what they're about and when you need to use them. Now, one of the things to quickly note is that what I'm going to walk you through is the settings that apply to the GoPro Hero 5 and the GoPro Hero 6 cameras. The menu is the same for both of these cameras, so it's going to apply to both. If you're using a GoPro that's older than this, you're not going to have a screen on the back that's a touch screen that you can control, so you have to do that manually. So again, this is going to apply to the Hero 5 and the Hero 6. Now again, when you start up the camera, you're going to notice that it defaults into camera mode. We're going to want to change that, and that's by touching this little icon right down here, the little video camera, and that's going to put you into your various modes. Now, across the top, you can see different icons. The one that we're looking for is the last one on the right, which looks like a little clock with an arrow on it. That's your time-lapse mode. Oops, that's photos. That's time-lapse mode. Now, once we're in here, you're going to notice that there's 3 different modes, as we've talked about in previous shows. First of all, there's time-lapse video mode, time-lapse photo mode, and night-lapse photo. Time-lapse video, that's shooting an actual video file. So instead of a bunch of individual pictures, it's going to take a video 1 frame at a time. So every 24 frames, or however you set it up, it's going to put that into a video. The nice thing about this is if you want a simple time lapse, you don't want a whole bunch of pictures and you want the camera to process the time lapse, so that when you plug the camera into your computer, or you put the SD card into your computer, it's going to have 1 video file that you pull over. So it's really quick. It's really easy. If I go into that mode, there's really only a couple options. How big do you want it? What is your resolution? I want 4K because I like 4K files. You're going to want to set your intervalometer. Go back to last week's show. as we talk all about the intervalometer and how that affects your shots. Figure out how long you want that to be. Quick, painless. Next up is time-lapse photo. Time-lapse photo is going to give you a few more options because, again, what this is doing is this is taking a bunch of individual pictures, which then you will stitch together after the shot is over. So you can control those a little more. Now, you'll notice right on the screen, you can set your interval to whatever you want it to be. Today, I'm going to be shooting 5-second intervals because I want a little more fast motion, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So we'll set my interval to 5. My field of view can be wide. It can also be linear, medium, or narrow. A lot of different options which you can kind of play with. I personally prefer wide. Yes, it does give the shot a little more of a fish-eye look, but that's okay. I really want that wide lens. Linear is going to take off that fish-eye look, but it's going to kind of crop you in a little more as far as what you get. So let's go back up to wide. So if I come up here in time-lapse photo mode, I do have some extra options, and I can get to those by swiping this direction. Now, one of the things I always like to turn on is what's called Pro Tune. Pro Tune is more of the advanced functionality that you can get here. So you notice there's a little power button at the bottom. I can turn that on, and now I can look at my settings. So for instance, color. There's 2 choices for color. I can go to GoPro color, or I can go to flat. So if you're into color correction, if you're into really adjusting the colors in post-production, when you're in the editor, I would recommend choosing flat. I really like the way that the GoPro color looks, and I'm fine with that, so I'm going to go GoPro. Next up is the WB, which stands for white balance. You can come in and you can set up a custom white balance depending on the light source. So for instance, if I'm shooting at night, I typically shoot 3000K, but you can kind of play with the white balance to see which colors you think look best depending on your conditions. For what I'm shooting here, I'm just going to keep it on native. Next we come to the ISO. The ISO is going to be the amount of light sensitivity that the picture has. Now, if you're shooting at night, you're going to want a higher light sensitivity so that it captures more light. Shooting in the daytime, I don't want that because the more the light sensitivity bumps up, the more grain and corruption I can get in that picture. So I'm going to keep it, I can set these. I can set a minimum. So I'm on my ISO here. I can go up to 1600 in this mode. But because I'm shooting in the day, I'm going to keep mine at 100. And the ISO max, I'm also going to put about 200. I really don't want a lot of variance in how sensitive the light is because I've got plenty of light coming between the reflection on the water and the nice bright daylight. Next is my EV comp, which is really just how much light you have coming in. Sharpness, I typically want to keep high, but you can adjust that. And if you really screw up the settings, you can always reset them with your Pro Tune reset button. So now if I swipe down, I can come back to my shot. I can make sure that it's the way that I want it to be. But again, this is all for taking photos. The next mode down is night lapse video. Night lapse is going to give you pretty much the same options that you had with the photo mode, but it's adding in that of shutter speed. So I can control how long my shutter stays open, which is ideal for shooting like nighttime, which is why it's called night lapse. So for instance, if I want to be shooting stars and I really want to hold that shutter open for a long period of time, I can come in and I can select 30 seconds and it's going to have some nice long shots. That's the benefit of night lapse mode. So again, night lapse mode is going to be your ideal situation for really capturing things that you want to film at night because it gives you that shutter speed control. So those are the 3 different modes that you can find typically within a GoPro camera. You've got your, again, just to recap, you've got your video mode, which is going to capture just one video of your time lapse, building it frame by frame by frame. Quick and easy, but not a lot of options for customization. You've got your time-lapse photo mode, which is going to take a series of photos, but you're going to have a lot of controls to what those photos look like. And finally, you've got night-lapse mode, which is going to give you specialized settings for doing time-lapse at night. So now you've seen all the different modes, you've seen the different settings. Hopefully you have some familiarity with how this camera works as you go into the location to set it up. So with that, let's head over to the waterfall, let's set up our shot, and let's see what we can get. Okay, so now I've moved over to the actual falls, and I'm shooting the actual time-lapse. Now, earlier I talked about my evil plan to stall out all the people that were showering in the falls. That seems to have worked because nobody is here. Nobody here but me, so that is fantastic. I've got my show producer, Joy. Hey, what are you doing? Say hi to the camera. Yes, good dog. Always my awesome show producer. So we're out here today shooting at Elsie Falls. Nice, beautiful Oregon afternoon. So let's look at my setup. So I wanted a good, nice shot of the falls. I'm shooting nice and wide. I didn't want to be too close because the water can mist out, and I do have that port open, as we talked about, which can let moisture into my camera, which I don't really want. So I'm keeping my distance. Plus, this will give me a little more room to kind of do a nice pan back in post. So that's good. Turns out that I decided to use time-lapse video for this particular time-lapse. I was going to use time-lapse photo, but because of the conditions, I really wanted just something that I could throw in easily and have just done. And so that's where time-lapse video comes in great. So it's shooting away. I do have it shooting on 5-second intervals so that I can better capture that water. And I only have about 30 minutes to get the whole shot done. So that gives me what I need in the time that I have, as we talked about on last week's episode. So compositionally, what I'm looking for is I'm looking for the falls to take up the bottom 2/3 of the frame. That way, I mean, granted, there's no sky of note today. There's no clouds. It's just a solid blue sky. So that's not really dramatic. I'm really hoping that the falls and the flow of the water through those falls is what's going to drive the dynamicism of the shot. And let's see when I get it into post how it looks. So that leads us to this week's question of the week, which is simply this. For those of you that are using GoPro cameras, specifically the Hero 5 or the Hero 6, as they have the same type of settings, which setting do you find yourself using the most? Is that time-lapse video, time-lapse photo, or night-lapse mode? Love to hear your stories. Love to hear what you find works best for you and why. But again, which setting do you find yourself using the most and why? Time-lapse photo, time-lapse video, or night-lapse. And remember to share your results with us so that we can feature those on upcoming shows as well. So if you've seen in this week's show, I enjoy being out and taking waterfall time-lapses in Oregon. Yes, most of the time I'm shooting stuff up in the sky, scenery, but watching the movement of water is also something that's fascinating to me. So I decided to see what other waterfall time lapses that I could find, and here are a few that really stand out to me for their quality and their innovation in shooting something like waterfall time lapses. Let's wrap up this week's episode of the Timelapse Show, coming to you from the great wilderness here in the Oregon Coastal Mountains. Remember that you can follow us on all sorts of different social media if you want to follow us in between shows. So you can go to Facebook, you can go to Twitter, you can go to Instagram and follow. Just do a quick search for The Timelapse Show. If you're watching on YouTube, remember you can click right down here somewhere and click the subscribe button. You can also turn on notifications so you can receive a notification when we post new episodes each week. If you want to communicate with us, send us a message. show@thetimelapseshow.com. Also, you can call the voicemail at 541-321-0472 if you'd rather leave us a voicemail, and that way we can feature it on a future show. Remember, if you're watching the YouTube version, you can leave comments below so we can look at those and address those as possible questions in future episodes as well. And if you're listening to the audio version, you can go to iTunes, leave us a review, give us a few stars, hopefully, and let other people know that the show exists. That really helps us share the message of the Timelapse Show. So that's it for this week's show. So grab a camera and go speed up the world. Let's try to be as unsweaty as possible in this brutally hot day, which is almost impossible. Great idea saying, let's go outside on the hot day. Whew, I stood up too fast. Ha ha. Head spinny. The joys of getting old.